our conversation into a moderated Q&A. Could I ask all of the presenters to come up here so that we can easily pass the mic? Maybe we can, and you can bring chairs too if you would like to sit. But I thought, maybe to start, we're all gathered here because of gems and these raw materials. Here, why don't y'all take these chairs? And then Luci. I'm gonna get her. Okay, great. Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So, I thought maybe we could start by talking about materiality. Shane, you mentioned the kind of rigorous material research that you've done, examining the kind of provenance of each stone in those mosaics, recovering kind of trade paths, thinking about kind of materials like what Luci's using, insect pieces, animal bones, really allowing the materials to guide the process. And then we have, sit here. Marge, Opie, and Tuggle all kind of mentioned, using feathers or beach stones or following the kind of really unique character of the materials to kind of guide the making process. So could you talk to me about how you approach material? Maybe
all right. So how we approach material. For us, so much comes down to our craftsmanship as one of the core values that we hold. That tends to be the most dear, and because we work so closely with our clients, a lot of it tends to be recycled material. So whether we're using their old gold or a sentimental piece and literally melting it down, adding fresh 24 karat grain in order to make the new piece, so much of it is infused with experience already. Or taking old stones, having them repolished and then put into the piece, so literally breathing new life into something that already is cherished. When it comes to actually sourcing new, of course we have our list of people, going for a sapphire, I'm going to reach out to this specific source that I have cultivated a relationship with and where I do know where it comes from, and I feel good about that process because, again, you have to live in your own head and morally, ethically, what are you okay with? That's what you need to kind of start with. And but touching on lab-grown stones, if we have really no problem using something that somebody else feels something strongly for, right? As long as you have some sort of a sense of want for the thing. I don't know, there's a very inherent pull energy that we all feel towards stones specifically. There's, we might all look at a table of stones and everybody's drawn to something different. And so if somebody has that pull towards something, we don't mind using the material. For us, it's going to come down to the craftsmanship and what we are able to add to that to make it that much better.
Well, that's a loaded question. First of all, I love reprocessing old materials and things like that. I spent almost 7 years working for one of the world's largest jewelry supply companies. And so I got a behind the curtain look at sourcing of materials and everything. And I also got a very close look at the politics of things. And I have been in an inner turmoil with my craft because of it. Because right now we have indigenous people in Brazil, for example, being displaced so that they can burn down the rainforest, so that they can open up gold mines and gem mines and things like that. And they tell us that they're hiring indigenous people and they're providing them with schools and everything. But those are indigenous people that were displaced in another location that are now displacing other indigenous people. So the political BS that they feed us doesn't support what is actually going on there. So it becomes very problematic for me having this deeper understanding. I also have friends in Brazil and other places who tell me exactly what's going on, with the politics and everything, which really is very resemblant of what we have going on in the United States right now. So as an indigenous person and knowing indigenous people for over the last 500 years in North, Central, and South America who have been displaced, and the reasons why they were displaced, it oftentimes comes back to material, you know. And as I showed you guys, I was showing you historical items, the mosaics and everything. We don't know what the politics was of the mining of that turquoise that occurred in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico 450, 500, 600 years ago. You know, so this is a continuous struggle that we as artists have to, we, as she said, deal with inside ourselves. And for me, it's a real struggle, because I've had to make a decision. I made a decision personally a long time ago that I was going to make everything myself. I wasn't going to farm it out. I had an opportunity, and I did design a line of buckles for the Stetson Hat Company, for example. So I have had opportunities to do mass production, and I understand the monetary benefits of that. However, the monetary benefits didn't override my conscience. And I had to make a decision, and it was a tough decision because it's a harder choice in life. If you're going to be the maker, the designer, the maker, the producer, the salesperson, the website manager, yada yada, all this stuff, it's easier for me to sleep at night that way, personally. I mean, everybody's going to do what they're going to do. It's your life. But I feel like we have to become more aware of where our materials are coming from. Especially stuff that's like coming from the ocean. I started out doing knockoff Zuni channel inlay over 30 years ago, working for a wholesaler in Santa Fe. And the spiny oyster and stuff that I got then was a much higher quality of what you see now, which is full of everything due to the pollutions of the ocean and everything. You also have things like Mediterranean coral and things like that, which are becoming very close. Which I love your coral, by the way, which become very. Well, and we have to ask ourselves, because that coral isn't full of pits, so where was it harvested, how was it harvested, because a lot of what's coming out of the ocean now is very degraded due to pollution and everything. So, you know, the material question is a huge question that as makers that we have to live with, however we choose to answer that question for ourselves. So to answer your question, I live and build life as an artist.
Yeah, I would say that the material that I personally enjoy using the most is the repurposed material, because of the sentiment that's in it and just the stories and all that gets passed back down through it. So.
Yeah, I really, when you said about living a guilt-ridden life as an artist, really resonates with me. I think sometimes I feel a lot of stress about what I use, because I can have more control over how it's cut, how much of it I'm using, and that can help make me feel a little bit more like when I'm investing in materials, I'm really going to make them stretch. I spent a short period of time working for like a heritage meat company, and they were a big proponent of like nose to tail cooking. And so I think a lot about nose to tail in my work. How can I use everything? As much of my silver that I can scrap and repurpose, as much of the stone that I can find different forms and different pieces of jewelry. Thinking about the material goes beyond the individual product that we're going to make, the life of that material from when it comes out of the ground, as long as it's in your stewardship.
Yeah, I agree with that. I remember that reminds me of the time when I was working in the fashion jewelry industry, where you just had piece after piece after piece. I just try to make pieces that people are going to want to keep, they're going to want to be heirlooms, they want to pass them down. They have a story to them, and they're not just your average cheap piece of jewelry that you're going to throw away next month. Materials are very important, and where they come from, and just really utilizing all of it.
I agree with what everybody else was saying, but also, yeah, like using all of the material. I like to approach material by learning how to work with it instead of against it, and like learning the properties of it as much as I can, but a lot of that comes from working with material directly. And and as far as sourcing, a lot of what I use is either found or given to me, and that part of it is important, but sometimes I will source things. A lot of my stones though come from my aunt who lives in Phoenix. She just sends me like buckets of different slabs, thankfully. So yeah, I kind of rely on that a bit in trying to find some of my own materials, but when it comes to sourcing, trying to be as responsible as possible, which is kind of difficult, but yeah, that's definitely important.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed there was this through line in all of your presentations about the kind of ethics of your practices and the kind of sustainability and stewardship, as Obi said, of the material. Speaking of the kind of legacy that materials can carry, specifically stone, which is kind of accreting over generations and, you know, lifetimes, geological lifetimes in this really expanded sense. Could you each speak to how legacy plays into your work? You know, what are your pieces carrying? I know Shane, you mentioned, you know, this tension between being a Navajo jeweler and a kind of like ranching jeweler, cowboy jeweler. And Luci, you know, you mentioned, you know, making work with your family and kind of using kind of heirloom pieces, really, and then collaboratively making. And then each of you have all kind of mentioned talking about making heirlooms or, you know, making things that are specific for clients that might be specific.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do think a lot about heirlooms. I think the first thing I thought of when you asked that was the history of the animals and their lives as well, because I'm using animal meats and that life once existed. And thinking about that as a material has been kind of difficult because and like separating it from life a little bit and not getting weirded out by those materials. But I think they were vessels that held the soul of the animal is how I kind of think of it, and I'm able to use these to mourn their loss. So I kind of think of legacy in that way, like the animal. But yeah, as well as like working with family and craft has been something that we grew up with. Our parents are antique dealers, so there's a lot of like legacy and history within objects that we grew up around. So I think a lot of that and storytelling through objects has kind of like come through my work.
I think about legacy, I think a lot of people have family stories for different stones have different meanings, they feel things. I know people are drawn to certain stones, and I think for me it's just like pieces that people want to connect with, pieces that make people feel good. They might not know why they want it, but they have to have it, and the stone itself makes them feel a certain type of way, and I think it's really interesting to see what people are drawn to, how they're drawn to it, what they think about when they wear it, and like people come to me with a certain stone, they have family ideas about it, or just personal beliefs in the meanings, and I think it's cool to see what people are drawn to.
Yeah, I really like that part of working with too. People have such different emotional responses to the material that makes them want to live with it, to wear it on their chest, on their hands, on their body. When I think of legacy, I don't come from, like a third generation jewelry family or anything. My parents were very confused when I told them I wanted to do jewelry for a living. However, jewelry is so important in my culture and my family. When I was born, my mom had my ears pierced within an hour. A nurse that had been helping when she gave birth to me had left the room, and by the time she came back, I had earrings on that my mom had brought with her to my delivery. And she likes to joke that the nurse came in and said, "She didn't come with those on, did she?" So I I've always lived with jewelry, and it's always been an important part of how I express myself, how I show the world who I am. And now as I've started working more with custom clients, whether it's for ceremonial jewelry or just because it's my anniversary, I got a new job, whatever. When you're thinking about what you're making, you're weaving in the intention that person set when they asked you to make it. I just did a project for somebody who was grieving a parent, was also grieving a really difficult season of life, and wanted me to make this ring for him. And so, as I was making it, I was thinking, what do I want this person to look at his hand and feel strengthened by every time he wears this ring? And it makes, that's sort of in the moment, but then you think, okay, their kids I've worked on projects with people where, oh, this was my grandfather's ring, he wore it every day, and now I want it to be a part of my everyday. The memory of those who came before you and the idea of what you're going to leave behind, all of those things, along with the present that you're trying to experience more fully, are woven into the story. And it's not always that big a deal. Sometimes people just want to keep it, but it's also really exciting to think that the work that we do can be so much a part of people's lives in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I think my favorite part of making jewelry is all the memories and all the emotion that's attached to each piece. And you get to basically take their ideas of what's important to them and turn it into a piece of art that they can keep close to them. I know we recently did a necklace for someone that lost a dog, and we were able to engrave the dog's initial on the back of it, and she kept it close to her heart every time she wears it. So just like those little things make it so special, and primarily why I do it.
This is interesting because I've been a practicing jeweler for almost 35 years now. So I've been doing this long enough that my work is back on the resale market, which means people that bought work for me 35 years ago have died, and their families have resold it, sometimes 2-3 generations now. So I oftentimes get phone calls from heirs who say, we own a necklace that you made for my grandmother X number of years ago, how much is it worth, we want to sell it, kind of things like that. So there was a time when I thought I was making heirlooms, and I still do, but that heirloom really only lasts as long as the person who defined it as such possesses it and keeps it. And what I've learned is typically that's 2 to 3 generations before that no longer has that story connected to it, which is kind of sad. It's interesting because in my tradition, things are passed from generation to generation. So not just jewelry, but everything, saddles, stories, ideas, equipment, different things. And so that was one of the reasons I chose to make jewelry myself and not have a workshop for me or have it be in Asia or things like that, was because at least going forward, because I've had enough recognition in the industry that, they might be talking about me 2 generations from now. Know that whatever has my hallmark on it, I made with his hands. So that's sort of the approach that I take now, is I know that the legacy is different. What it means to me is different than what it means to the person. Because at the end of the day, sadly, it comes down to commerce. Like I said, I worked for a big supply company, and when silver prices got real high, people were bringing jewelry in, and they literally just bust the stones out of it to get the metal, because the metal was what had the value. And there was these buckets full of gemstones. I used to love to go through them, that they throw away. So, a lot of that jewelry and silverware and stuff that was being cashed in had value to somebody for sentimental reasons and everything at some point. But then at some point it became only what it was worth by the gram.
It's kind of interesting to hear everybody's take before kind of finishing out that question, because I would say that many of us echo the same principle, right? We want our clients to feel deep connection to our work, and that's what really drives us forward. I really think of legacy as a thread to the past. So even though I am creating a piece that very much is intentional for one specific client, and that we're channeling what they want into the piece within our own aesthetic, it's still a thread that kind of links us all through time. So I do think about wanting very much our work to last generations, and for this to just be one marker in time. And in part, there's really no jewelry in my family history. Like, there's nothing to kind of draw from, and pieces that have any significance at all. And then I get clients that come in with things that have been handed down from one to the next to the next to the next. And again, they might have, oh, I remember my grandmother taking this out of her jewelry box and peeking over the table, and there's these amazing things that are contained within just a glance at the piece. And I love that. And so being able to just be a part of somebody's ultra special bank of memories in their mind is a pretty uniquely amazing thing. And it's interesting to hear you talk about how now a couple generations have passed, and how that really isn't quite what we think it might be. And perhaps with a couple singular pieces out there, sure, those are the ones that stay in the family for forever. But a big bulk of the work eventually will be sold. And I'm a huge proponent of hallmarking your work. There's not a maker's mark, and there's been plenty of times where Matt brings me a finished piece, and I'm like, well, where's the stamp? He's like, oh, it's a little late now. I'm like, nope, we gotta find a way to fit it in there, because that is true. How else will anybody ever know in 100 years, 150 years? They never will, ever. And so I think that kind of piece of just marking it, and while the intention can be that when we create the piece, we don't know that will be passed along with it over time, but making sure that, your legacy as an artist is attached to it.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to the audience, but I have one final question. Something that I noticed in each of your presentations was this element of educating that you have to do, and part of it's in the content of the work. Sometimes, storytelling about colony collapse, for instance, or these kinds of like ecological issues, or in Shane's case, educating anthropologists or recovering ancestral knowledge, or Marge, Opie, and y'all talked about kind of educating clients, or like kind of helping them train their eye, or helping them understand why it's valuable, or could you talk a little bit about how education intersects with your work?
That's a good question. I think a lot of that comes from, so behind the work is a lot of research, and it's kind of finding a way to represent the research visually, so that if somebody sees the work, maybe they'll go down a rabbit hole and find out more about the subject. But a lot of it too comes from having conversations with people about the work to kind of learn a little bit more deeply about it. I'm also an educator. I teach jewelry and metalsmithing, so that's kind of like directly, I guess, related to my work. And I learn a lot from my students. I think that their like fresh perspective to jewelry making always excites me about my own work. So there's kind of like a very reciprocal relationship with my students in that way.
For me, education is very important to my work. It's very interesting. People they will buy a piece of gold and know that gold is worthy of something, but they see something made out of solid stone. They know nothing about the stone, and they don't necessarily think it's worth any money. They can love it, they can think, and also they see it sometimes and think it's plastic, and you have to educate them how the stone comes out of the ground, where it comes from, how you get it from the miners, how you take the time and the tools to learn how to carve, and then make it into a piece of jewelry, and make it into something wearable, something that's been tested, and just something to be, for me, something to be worn because stone cracks. And so I have to work with it and make sure it's something that's not going to break on someone. And I spend a lot of time talking about my process, and my materials, and it's just a lot of education of why this piece is special.
Yeah, education is a big part of explaining the value to people. A part of me wants to talk about the part of educating people that is like, my heart and soul goes into this, and I feel so strongly about these materials, but I will actually be a little bit more mercenary in my answer. When it comes to being a small maker in the current media landscape, the way that education serves my work is explaining to people why the thing that they see from me is worth their time, maybe before they think about buying the thing from a company that has a much higher marketing budget than I do. Education functions in place of the amount of money that I might give to Meta or Google to pay for ads, because people might come to me to hear something that they didn't know before, to learn something about a material maybe they haven't heard of, and that is what I offer instead of just being able to get their sort of internet consciousness with photos of what I do. So it helps what they see stick in the mind, and for me, I was very much a reader growing up. I love learning random new things, even if there's nothing for me to do with them, and I feel that people are really insatiable. There's so much curiosity, and education has become a really fun way to connect with people and to get myself out of my own head about my work, and it helps people realize why they might want something that's one of a kind from somebody who made it with their hands instead of something mass-produced, when in a lot of ways our culture encourages people to focus on things that are heavily branded or heavily mass-produced because they help form social belonging. So it's just another way of communicating with people, and it's available to everybody instead of sort of having to be commercially offered.
So yeah, I believe there's kind of two different types of education that I see. There's one, educating your clients on what it takes to do what you're doing. A lot of people now have like instant gratification, where you can just print something off a computer and it's done, and that's one process. But then there's also your own education and education of colleagues and all that. And when I first started in the jewelry industry, the people that were really talented and really good and been doing it for a long time, they didn't want to share their techniques, they didn't want to open up, and it's been really refreshing recently to see all the different schools, GRS down there, and just all the sharing of knowledge that happens now. I'm a big believer, the more that everybody shares, the more everybody's going to expand and do better work, so it's cool to see that too.
Yeah, I echo what he's saying about when I started 30 plus years ago, most jewelers wouldn't share anything with you. Everything was a secret. They thought you were going to steal their designs, their techniques, their ideas, and their customers, and therefore you were taking food out of the refrigerator, which is understandable. They were coming from a loss or a lack mentality. My goal now, where I'm in my career, is, and I've done this for the last 7 years, actively, is anybody who has a question for me, I'll tell you exactly how I did it. I'll tell you exactly how I make my jewelry, I'll tell you all the techniques, I'll tell you the tools I use, I'll tell you everything I know, because I don't want to die with my knowledge. Because I know a lot of guys who did amazing stuff within my lifetime, mentors that I had that are gone now, but we still don't know how they did what they did because they didn't tell anybody how they did what they did. And it's really sad when you think about it. But the other side of the education coin is I'm trying to educate myself and take responsibility, like what we were talking about earlier, where my materials are coming from, how what I'm doing is impact the greater world, and take responsibility for that as well. So I think education is a two-way street. I'm really trying more to educate myself and to be more responsible for who I am as a maker, as well as sharing the knowledge that I have with anyone who wants it.
Yeah, same, guys. There's nothing more important than education, and Matt and I actually really value that highly. And over every year, we both try to go somewhere and take a class, find a master or something that we actually value the most, because we believe it really helps you stay passionate about the work, to network with other people that are also passionate about the work, and you get to. The joke in engraving is you can ask 10 engravers how to do gold inlay and get 10 different answers. Guess what? It looks mostly the same at the end, but there's so many different approaches, ways that you can layer it into the work that you do. And so working inside of just your own head all the time, that's not always going to be the most efficient. So both educating yourself, but also the clients. I mean, like I said in our speech, their clients do not know what it takes to do handmade today, and especially in the US where it's more expensive to live there. I have 2 kids, I gotta feed my kids, I got things to do, and educating them on what to look for, because I call it fast fashion jewelry, but we see this giant trend with really, really thin pieces today that pretty much are gonna break within a few months if you wear them on the regular. What does that actually do for anybody? It doesn't do anything. Bridal rings that, okay, it looks like there's no metal there that's holding your stone. That's great. You're probably going to lose the stone. That's not going to help you. You're going to be upset. The jeweler's going to be upset. Nobody wins. So educating them on why you want a piece that actually is going to hold up over the next 50 years, well, if nobody's teaching you, you don't know what to look for. You don't know what you're looking for with your prompts, with your channels, and also how to maintain those pieces. I can't tell you how many that we look at on the daily that are held together with thoughts and a prayer and a good amount of lotion. I mean, so there's lots of how to care for these pieces and why you should take care of them, why you should care about these things. That all comes down to, it ends up being us, and we're independent ones that aren't necessarily focused on making the quick buck all the time. I don't have any sales quotas, because guess what? I might need to spend a whole lot more time with one client educating them on this piece than another. And so it does come down to us constantly educating ourselves to be better with our sourcing and better with how we use our materials, and not, how we can use it all and not necessarily have waste. And then also educating the client as to why they should care about those things. And when you are talking about big marketing budgets and somebody being able to kind of get in front of those people better, yes, but people talk. And so something that's been increasingly common in our store is people come in saying their friend, neighbor, whatever, said they were raving about us and had to come in and see what we did there, and they're blown away that our attention to detail, our craftsmanship, and what we actually care about are the same things that they care about too.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Do y'all have any questions or comments for these great speakers? I want to reflect something that Luci said that was really beautiful and turn it into a question about embracing differences, that material can originate from different parts of the world, and though it was made by the same geological processes, it comes out different. How do you embrace that difference and use that as a metaphor for humanity? And then I was reflecting on Shane. You were saying that there's one piece that you showed that was made with a Persian piece of Persian turquoise. So how do you choose in your pieces what stone you're using that you have all of this knowledge of the history and political context, and so how did you make that choice for that one piece? And then for everyone, how did you guys have any stories about choosing, especially because we're in Tucson and there are lots of choices to make?
Choosing. It's funny, the friends that I stay with while I'm in Tucson came with me to Tuggle yesterday, and they don't work in the jewelry industry, and every place we went to, one of them asked me, how do you choose? There's so many things, how do you choose? And it's, sometimes you're making a more explicit decision. I want this color, I want this effect. I know that this type of effect, I want a jasper that looks a certain way. So I'm either looking in a certain part of Australia or a certain part of Idaho, and that's how I'm going to make that choice. Or this is something that somebody is going to wear every day, and it's a ring, so I want maybe a certain hardness of stone. there are those sort of practical choices, and then sometimes the choice is, well, I always see it done this way, and maybe I love. I'll use Christopher's again as an example because it's the color variation between different margins are really interesting to me. And there's a period where I was like, well, throwing material is really beautiful, but it's so green and it's so identifiable. So I'm going to use this Brazilian material because I love how big and milky it is, and that color really speaks to me, and I don't see it a lot, so it can help me feel like my work looks special in this particular way. So I don't know, those are a couple different thoughts about choosing, but I'd be very curious about what you have to say about being an Indigenous artist and using turquoise that comes from outside of the US when there is such a turquoise culture and history of turquoise close. I'd be curious about that.
So this is interesting because somebody earlier asked me a very similar question. What the deal was with domestic turquoise, and it's really not that complicated. It all comes down to commerce, international commerce actually. So the biggest turquoise mines in the world right now are in China, and they're producing some of the best gem quality turquoise that you can get. So what happened was a decade or a decade and a half ago, the Chinese came to the United States and bought as much domestic high-grade turquoise as they could. They bought it all. They used the Walmart method. They bought everything up, so that now all we have is what we buy from them. And they name their mines like Cloud Peak and things like this that are very similar to what we name our mines here in the United States. Because the vast majority of people who buy turquoise jewelry are not educated. Now, we're in town with some of the greatest turquoise gurus that you'll ever meet. The reason why I noted that that turquoise in that buckle was Persian is because there's a lot of jewelers that will buy that turquoise because it looks like Ithaca Peak. That mine quit mining in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Ithaca Peak, high-grade gem quality, sells by the carat. To the naked eye, to the average person, you can't tell the difference between that Persian turquoise and Ithaca Peak. Some unscrupulous people will use that turquoise and say, oh, this was in my family for generations, it's Ithaca Peak. Okay? I don't lie. The guy who sold it to me said it was Persian. I say it's Persian, that's my provenance. Because where a lot of value comes from, in turquoise in particular now, is provenance, the paper trail. The necklace I'm wearing is Lone Mountain. The provenance in it is Gene Waddell, was partial owner of the Lone Mountain mine. They dug this turquoise out of the mine in the 1980s. They drilled holes in these rough cut beads, and they sold them to Deanna Olson, who owns Silver Sun in Santa Fe. Deanna Olson put them in her safe. 25 years later, she was cleaning her safe out when she sold her gallery. She said, hey Shane, you'll never guess what I found. I get the turquoise from her. I make this necklace. These beads right here, you will find teeth on a chicken before you will find these beads for sale in the market. You're looking at about $180 a carat for these beads. So it's all about provenance. It's all about educating yourself. It's knowing your materials, and it's also knowing the people you're buying from. Not everybody's going to tell you the truth. In fact, sadly, in my 30 plus years, the vast majority of them aren't telling you the truth. Because they're trying to make a sale. Because they're trying to keep their refrigerators full. And I've been burned a lot. You learn fast by getting burned. In 30 years, I've been burned a lot. So I've learned how to tell the difference between stabilized, and I've learned about the Zachary technique and all these different techniques of stabilizing, color enhancing, making turquoise look better, all these different things. But it all comes down to money at the end of the day. And as a maker, this is what I was talking about before. I become responsible for educating myself. Because now, legally, if I sell something and the person who buys it from me finds out that it's not what I said it was, then I end up holding the bag on that. Unless I have a paper trail that says that the person who sold it to me claimed it was something else. As far as that piece of turquoise, that was a beautiful piece of turquoise for what I wanted to use, And I don't have a problem with a piece of turquoise coming from China, coming from Israel, coming from Iran, coming from Australia. It's all geologically the same. It's just like us people. And I don't look at people because of their political inklings. I take people for who they are, where they are, how they are. And I do my turquoise the same.
Other questions? Okay, well, these folks might be here in the artist market, so you can talk to them more after this talk. Thank you all so much. Can you give a round of applause for these amazing speakers? Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Brianne to talk about next steps and awards.
And thank you, Sarah, for your awesome questions. You're very thoughtful. I appreciated them. And thank you all so much. Yeah. Thank you guys. Yeah, you don't have to stay up here. You're welcome to. We just have some fun announcements. So